Hi, my name is Taniqua Williams, and welcome to my presentation on conflict and negotiation in organizations. Chapter 15, COMS 622, Liberty University. Let's begin with the overview on slide 2. The nature of conflict in organizations, common forms and causes of conflict, reactions to conflict, managing conflict, and negotiation in organizations. Now that we've discussed the overview, let's get started with slide 3, the nature of conflict in organizations. Conflict is a process resulting in the perceptions of two parties that they are working in opposition to each other in ways that produce feelings of discomfort and or animosity. Now, I know that you and I are Christians and have never had a conflict before, so a presentation on conflict in organizations is not necessary. However, for those of you who have had a conflict within an organization, let's take a deeper dive on the subject. Conflict is a common occurrence in organization. First of all, let's note that conflict is a process and not a singular event. It evolves over time and draws upon previous events. While it may emerge as a result of a specific event, more than likely it has been brewing for quite some time. Further, the parties involved have to actually perceive it in order for it to exist as a conflict. Prime example, my sister and I have heated debates all the time. While others may perceive our debates as a form of conflict, she and I see it just as that, a debate. In which case the conflict would not exist because she and I do not see it as a conflict. Finally, discomfort and animosity must occur in order for the conflict to be real. We should also note that the parties involved in conflict may be individuals, groups, and or organizations. Conflict may exist across levels and may result from the anticipation of future problems. For example, a person may behave antagonistically toward another person whom he or she expects to pose obstacles to goal achievement. Although conflict is considered harmful and something to avoid, it can also have some benefits, such as the stimulation of new ideas, promotion of healthy competition, and an energized behavior. A moderate level of conflict may also lead to higher performance, which brings me to my next slide, slide 4, common forms and causes of conflict. In general, there are 3 basic forms of conflict that exist within an organization. There are 3 additional forms that can relate to conflict between organizations. Number 1 is task conflict. It refers to the conflict regarding goals and content of the work. Number 2 is process conflict, and this occurs when the parties agree on the goals and the content of the work, but disagree on how to achieve the goals and actually do the work. Number 3 is relationship conflict. This occurs when the parties have interpersonal issues. This type of conflict mentioned above with the example of myself, and my sister. At somewhat a different level, we run into the 4th type, which is legal conflict. This arises when there are different perceptions between organizations. A good example of this within government organizations is whistleblowing, or the disclosure by an employee of illegal or unethical conduct on the part of the organization. So what actually causes conflict? This is a good question that can be answered on the following slide, slide 5, causes of conflict. There are 3 causes of conflict mentioned in our text, the first being interpersonal conflict. Interpersonal conflict is a conflict between 2 or more individuals, is almost certain to occur in any organization given the great variety of perceptions, goals, attitudes, and so forth among its members. Number 2 is intergroup conflict. This conflict is between 2 or more organizational groups, is also quite common. For example, members of a firm's marketing group may disagree with those in production over the product quality or delivery schedules. And number 3, conflict between organizations and environment. Conflict that arises between one organization and another is called interorganizational conflict. A moderate amount of interorganizational conflict resulting from business competition is of course expected, but sometimes conflict becomes more extreme. An example of this is when Apple sued and won a lawsuit against its Korean competitor Samsung, charging that it infringed on its patent rights for technologies and designs used in the iPhone. In addition to the above-mentioned causes of conflict, task interdependence can also result in a conflict across levels that were previously noted. The greater the independence between departments, the greater the likelihood that conflict will occur. There are 3 major forms of interdependence: pooled, sequential, and reciprocal. Pooled interdependence represents the lowest level of interdependence and therefore results in the least amount of conflict. Sequential is the output of one unit because the input of another unit in sequential fashion. This creates a moderate level of interdependence and a somewhat higher potential for conflict. And the third is reciprocal interdependence. And this exists when activities flow between both ways between units. This form has the highest potential of conflict. With all of this conflict in place, it seems that there will be no end. Is there a solution to resolve so much conflict? This brings me to my next slide, slide 6, managing conflict. Conflict resolution is a managed effort to reduce or eliminate harmful conflict. Now the times this would come into play would be in the cases that conflict are more disruptive, too much time is being spent on the conflict versus production, and conflict focuses on internal goals of the group versus organizational goals. Conflict stimulation is the creation and constructive use of conflict by a manager. Now I know what you're thinking. Why in the world would anyone want to stimulate a conflict? Well, one might stimulate a conflict in work groups that are stagnant, one in which consensus is too easily reached, when groups are not creative or challenging, or when the change is needed for competitiveness. Which brings me to my next slide, slide 7. We can also use structure to manage conflict following the below styles. The managerial hierarchy. One manager in charge of people, groups, or departments in conflict. Rules and procedures, which are standard rules and procedures for the organization. Liaison rules, which is a manager has a liaison role, coordinating activities and acting as a common point of contact. And number 4, task forces, which is drawing one representative from each group. We can also use interpersonal techniques to manage conflict by applying the following: team building, survey feedback, and third-party peacemaking. Team building promotes overall group effectiveness and enhances the satisfaction of individuals who work in groups. Survey feedback responds to a questionnaire intended to measure perceptions and attitude, and third-party peacemaking is used to address extreme conflict involves bringing an outsider to facilitate conflict resolution. In addition to managing conflict, we can also institute negotiation within organization, which brings me to slide 8. Negotiation and organization. Negotiation is the process which two or more parties, people, or groups reach agreement on an issue even though they have different preferences regarding that issue. There are 5 different approaches to negotiation. The first being individual differences. This focuses on the personality traits of the negotiators, including demographic characteristics and personality variables. The second, situation characteristics. This is the context within which negotiation takes place. They include the types of communication between negotiators, the potential outcomes, relative power for both parties, time frame of negotiation, number of people representing each side, and the presence of other parties. Game theory. Game theory was developed by economists using mathematical models to predict outcome in negotiation situation. Cognitive approaches is number 4, which recognizes that negotiators often depart from perfect rationality during negotiation. It tries to predict when and how negotiators will make these departures. And the final one is the win-win negotiation. This approach does not treat negotiation as a game in which there are no winners and losers. Instead, it approaches negotiation as an opportunity for both sides to be winners, to get what they want out of the agreement. The win-win approach is a 4-step approach illustrated by the PRAM model. The PRAM model is plan, relationship, agreements, and maintenance. Plan requires each negotiator to set goals. Relationships negotiators are activities enable positive personal relationships to develop, cultivate a sense of mutual trust, and allow relationships to develop fully before discussing business in earnest. Agreements which that are each party confirm the other party's goal, verify areas of agreement, propose and consider positive solutions to reconcile areas of disagreement, and jointly resolve any remaining differences. And maintenance entails providing meaningful feedback based on performance, each of the parties holding up their end of the agreement, keeping in contact and reaffirming trust between parties. Which brings me to slide 9. In conclusion, conflict within organizations are bound to happen. The way we react to those situations will affect the future relationships for the group. We should always remember what it says in the good book, Colossians 3:13, forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have quarreled against any, even as Christ has forgave you, so also do ye. With that in mind, let's move to the final slide, slide 10. My questions for you are, is it possible to avoid conflict within organizations? What tactics have you used to negate possible conflict? Were you successful or did you fail? And was there anything you would do differently based on the information you received from this chapter? I hope you enjoyed this presentation. God bless. Taniqua.